Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figure It Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be having just a simple discussion video about gaming economics, specifically as it pertains to the 7th video game generation, the Xbox 360, the Nintendo Wii, and the PlayStation 3, and why their prices are suddenly skyrocketing. We're going to talk all about it and give kind of a general history lesson of why this occurs and maybe what you can do about it. But before we do that though, if you guys can do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, as well as check out all my social media stuff in the description. I've got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, my Spreadshirt, travel channel. I appreciate the support on all those platforms. Thank you so much. Let's get into it. So yeah, this is just a discussion video. That's all we're going to be doing. I noticed this a lot recently. There's been articles written about it. Other people are making videos on it, like Xbox 360 prices skyrocketing. And of course, people in my Discord are constantly talking about like, hey, did you see this game? Oh, whoa, look at this. This is going up. So rather than, I don't want to do the usual thing about, man, games are expensive. This sucks. Like, I hate when people do generic videos about stuff like that. So I actually wanted to get behind why that's happening and just kind of explain it so that you yourself can understand how gaming trends work, how it's correlated directly to demographics, and that actually allows you to very readily predict when stuff will get more expensive versus when it will get cheaper. Now, in order to understand that, you just have to know really the basics of video game history. Video games as an art form, an entertainment form, really didn't exist until the late 70s, mostly associated with the launch of the Atari 2600. Now, granted, there were systems prior to that, of course, the Pong era, first gen and stuff, and yeah, you get it. But basically, that's where it became this massive economic boom. Now, an entire generation, we know them as Gen X, was the ones who really started playing those as kids. And then as time moved on, the later Gen Xs, got into things like the NES, and then millennials, we grew up. I'm a millennial myself, and we largely grew up on the Super Nintendo, the Sega Genesis, and, later millennials grew up on the N64. You get it. Like, you understand what I'm saying. So what ends up happening, typically, in video game history is a video game system will be at the zenith of its financial power when the system is relevant, when the system is successful. Of course, the asterisk to that is the system successful? All three of these machines were. And when that happens, of course, that's when it's the most readily available, but also typically when most games are at their most expensive. But that situation also determines whether or not games-specific titles will end up being more expensive or cheap. So things that are overly produced eventually drop off massively in value. Things that are some sort of weird print error, a game that was recalled, or something that had a very low print run, that kind of thing, for accidental reasons usually, are the stuff that accidentally blows itself up to the top. We all kind of know those stories. But as a general trend, that's the peak. And then what ends up happening is shortly after a generation is over, maybe within a year or two, the older technology, mainly when the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 and the Wii U launched and took this generation, the next generation over, these systems, their content largely started to plummet in value. And that's true of any era. You can look back at the NES, for example. Absolutely gargantuan success, height of power there, revolutionized the video game industry. But when the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis were around, the NES just kind of fell off a cliff. That is normal. We're all used to that. But then you see this like retro bubble years later where you're like, how could games for the Dreamcast or the GameCube cost that much now? I remember passing on them when they were a couple of bucks. Yeah, there's a reason for that. And again, that correlates very specifically with demographics. Now, we talked about, you might have been a kid or something when you played a system initially. That's standard. What ends up happening is, usually around the time a person is 22 to like 25, that age range, they go through what is known as a quarter-life crisis. And the reason that happens, typically, is if you think about it, at least in the Western, specifically American experience, when you're growing up, you know a very specific life. You know your parents, you know the home you grew up in, maybe your family pet, the school you went to. Like, life has this very specific vibe to it. And the whole time you're in that situation, you're typically told like, okay, your goal is to get good grades and get through school. That way you get to the next level of school, like middle school, and then on to high school, and then college. And then once you're out of college, you go get a job and you're an adult. That part's always left very intentionally vague, right? So around 22 is when you typically graduate from college. And in that time, you suddenly have this like, okay, the entire life I was told I was supposed to be setting up for is over. That whole thing, all of my life where it was this compartmentalized thing is effectively over. I'm now an adult. I may or may not still be living with my parents. I may or may not be living with roommates. I may or may not be living on my own, depending on what your own specific circumstances are. But typically, that's kind of what happens. And when people deal with, like, I went from that to, like, now I have to find a job and I have to pay all my own bills. My parents won't cover me anymore, but like that kind of thing. What's normal is a quarter-life crisis, where you just kind of freak out. And so you want to seek out some stability. So what people tend to do, at least if they're, of course, gaming fans, this applies of anybody, by the way, anything, if you grew up on like comic books or whatever it is, typically around that age, people suddenly rebuy their childhood. And that tends to drive prices up because naturally that creates more demand for a product that had previously been considered dead and worthless. Hence, newer prices. Now, that whole concept goes in waves because eventually that same group that bought that stuff, the early 20s, they are like, well, I have a job now, so I have disposable income, because maybe you're living with your parents but you're not paying rent, or you're paying rent with a roommate or something like that, but you're still like making money and you don't necessarily have the largest overhead. It's not till later when you get into like a serious relationship, or you have kids, or you're trying to buy a home or something like that, where you're trying to buy a car, whatever it is. Those kinds of things start to eat up your finances. But that usually doesn't happen until like your mid to late 20s into your 30s, etc. And so that early phase is when a lot of people start buying a bunch of that stuff. Now, naturally, over the course of time, the person who went out and bought all that stuff, they're like, this is awesome. Now they're trying to buy a house. Now they're trying to have a kid, whatever it is. And they go, I have all this stuff that I don't really have time to play because I'm constantly at work, or, I'm with the girlfriend or the boyfriend or whatever your situation is. Now I have to pay this mortgage. This is awful. And you look at that collection and you go, that is a lot of money I'm just letting sit rot on a shelf. Look at these prices. I can't resist it. And so the people start dumping that stuff and the prices go back down. Not all the way, but they go back down. Never to that completely worthless phase, but they go back down. Because you're always going to have guys like me are freaks of nature that exist outside of that bubble typically and are still like, yeah, I'll take everything. I need more Amiga CD32s. But I'm an exception, not the norm. This is a general average case. So you get what I'm saying. It goes in waves, right? And eventually, and we see it again, the next phase of a big bubble burst where it gets bigger, where demand is suddenly higher, is when that generation that grew up on something as kids, now their kids are gone. Their kids have gone off to college. They no longer have to deal with the expense of that. They've probably paid off their home. They've probably paid off their car. They're in a stable relationship with their wife or husband or whatever it is, and they're just like, you know what? It's my time. I want to have some fun. I'm still working, sure, but I want to be able to come home at night and play some games that remind me of my childhood from a more stable era. And then you get that second rise. But that fails too, usually for the same kind of reason, mostly down to like, yeah, it was cool to revisit all this stuff, but I don't really need any of this. Like, I got grandkids coming up probably, and this doesn't matter to me anymore. And then they sell it again. Then eventually, they have retired. They're done with work. They just want to stay at home, live out their golden years, etc. And when that happens, there's a little bit of another burst, where you get another little, a group of people who come after some games and say, like, let's play those again. But the interesting thing is we don't actually know how long that goes, because in the span of human history, video games have not existed long enough for us to see an entire generation play it out. Effectively, video games were introduced when Gen X was children. Gen X is still in the workforce. They're still around. So we don't know when Gen X eventually dies off, which they haven't. We still have members of the greatest generation, much less the boomers, before we have to deal with that. Apologies if you hear sirens. I don't think they like me giving away economic policy here. But yeah, anyway, so when that generation eventually completely taps out, will all the content they produced and enjoyed, does that just go into museums? Who knows how many people will care about that? Now you're probably sitting there like, I thought this had something to do with the Xbox 360. It does. Because here's the fun fact about the Xbox 360. This system launched in November of 2005. At the time I record this, it is April of 2024, which means it's been about 18 and a half years since that system launched. And before you kill yourself from how old that probably makes you feel, keep in mind that means somebody born when the 360 came out, like the same day, is in college now. Let that sit in. Let that sink into your mind. Which means that's about time to start buying it all. But keep in mind, obviously the majority of people who were playing 360 as children were not born when it came out. They were probably like 5, 6, 7. Add 5, 6, 7 years to that, congratulations. You're in that initial demographic that buys all this stuff when they go through a quarter-life crisis. That, my friends, is why Xbox 360, Wii, and PS3 games are suddenly spiking. Now here's the thing. You have two choices. Well, you have three choices. You can just do nothing, I guess, if you don't care. One, you can get out in front of it knowing this information and start picking up any games you can get your hands on that you care about if you do care about collecting the 360. Or you just have to wait until it burns itself out. Now because of that model and that trend, that's why things like the Genesis have come way down. That's why things like the N64 are coming way back down. We are now reaching a point where 6th gen stuff is going to start sinking back down. Dreamcast, GameCube, Xbox, PS2, that stuff's going to start coming down, while 360, Wii, and PS3 stuff starts going up. But also, here's the good news in all this. Because of how these trends work, we are at the point where PS4 and Xbox One content specifically are both at their peak lowest value. Nintendo is a bit of an oddity here because they had two systems in the 8th gen, both the Wii U and the Switch is obviously still active, and the Wii U has a very fixed, understood price point at this point just because it's a small library. Got kind of a unique case in both situations. But PS4 and Xbox One content, if you care about those systems, it will never get cheaper than it is right now. So get on that if you do care. But if you're into the 360 and PS3, those are your choices. And now hopefully you understand that, because as you understand the gaming demographics, you can also predict when is a good time to buy versus when is a good time to sell versus when is a good time to just stay away. And I'm curious, because I've had this kind of talk with a lot of people over the years, and it's almost always the same story. If you go to like a convention or something and you ask somebody like what game are they looking to go find that they're missing, and they give you a specific answer, you can always predict their age based on that. Like I was at Game On in Phoenix, and at my panel, we asked the audience, like, what are you guys looking for? And this dude said, I'm looking for Alien vs. Predator for the Jaguar. And I said, let me guess, you're like 40-something? And he said, 43. I'm like, yeah, exactly. Because it's always the same group of people that predictably want that same stuff in waves. So you can use that information to your advantage to get better prices on stuff, and if you want to sell stuff at a higher premium as well. Hopefully that helps you guys. Hopefully you appreciate it, and now you have a better understanding of why this is going the way it is. So if you guys are interested, I'd be very curious to see what you guys have to say on the matter. How many of you are, like, I'm 37, so normally a 37-year-old would be like purging a lot of their stuff at my age. I'm not. I'm a freak, but a lot of people do that. Tell me. I've seen comments like this over the years where people are like, man, I watch you all the time because I love collecting stuff, but I just couldn't do it anymore because I had the kid, I have like the new car, I have the house, whatever it is, the girlfriend takes too much money, that kind of thing. I'm curious, what everybody out there, what is your situation if you want to discuss it, and do you intend to continue to collect at a certain age, or what age are you and what is your plan? I'm very curious because demographics, like, they really do a substantial amount to predict what video games will cost. And again, that applies to anything, not just, like I said, comic books or whatever. But since we talked about video games, that's the context. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, everybody. If you could do me a favor, please like the video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, as well as check out all the social media stuff in the description: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, Travel Channel. I appreciate the support. Especially pop into the Discord, because we have chats like this all the time. It's just we don't always make videos about it, and I think you guys will get a kick out of that. And I do appreciate the support on Patreon. It really does keep the whole infrastructure of the channel going. Thank you very much, and I'll see you all later.